So I am Jim Birmingham, or James as my slide says. I'm responsible for our user and data security project. So before we talk about UEBA, I thought it would be important to get everyone up to speed on what an insider threat is. It's a phrase that we often don't like to use. Nobody likes to think of their employees as a threat. It's a scary word, and it definitely is a phrase that a lot of people try to avoid because it makes people uncomfortable. But we need to talk about insider threats because they're a real threat to our organization. And I'll show you some statistics in a minute that really help you understand how big of a threat this really is. But before we do that, I want to make sure you understand what an insider threat is. An insider threat is basically a malicious threat that's caused by an employee. Could be a contractor, a business associate, a former employee. Somebody that you trust and you've given access to data within your network. And the types of threats that these actors can typically cause could be anything from negligence, right? The example that was given before, somebody goes in to send a document. They were starting to type in the name and they accidentally picked the wrong name and they sent it to a competitor. Oops, it happens. Maybe they're using the same password on their Gmail site that they're using for their corporate account. And maybe their Gmail password gets compromised. Well, now somebody has access to their password to the corporate site. They can log in via the VPN. Maybe the person's just trying to make a statement. They want to get back at the company. They're angry. Something happened that they want everyone in the world to know about. So they're going to take some action. They're trying to get even with the company and they're going to do some sabotage. Maybe try to delete some data, cause the company some harm. Get some revenge for perceived injustice. Or maybe they're just trying to gain an advantage. Maybe they plan to start their own company or they're leaving to go work for a competitor and they want to steal the list of customers that they were previously selling to. So there's a whole bunch of different motivations for this. But at the end of the day, insiders are a real threat. How big of a threat? Well, here's some statistics that help you understand that. 69% of all executives report in the last 12 months that there has been an attempted data theft within their organization. 69%. 62% of business users report they have access to data they shouldn't see. Wow. That's a staggering statistic. What are they doing with that data? Well, hopefully what you expect them to do because they're trusted insiders, but maybe they aren't. 32% of organizations have no capability to prevent an insider attack. None. And 9% of organizations that do claim that they actually feel that their capabilities are enough to stop one of these. Only 9%. 45% of IT execs say that malicious insider attacks is one of the risks that they're just simply unprepared for. There's a majority of the attacks that are happening in your environment are insider threats. Why are they insider threats? Because they're hard to detect. They go unnoticed. You have to be able to understand the activity that a user is doing and how it's different today, right now, from the activity that they normally do. That's the only way you can detect an insider threat. Otherwise, it's just a normal user in your environment. And we spend a lot of time in security thinking about malware. How do we stop malware? Malware is a scary thing. Millions of products on the market. The whole job in life is to stop malware from coming into your environment. The reality is, if you were to put an IDS in your network, if you were to put in a sandboxing application, you'd discover that you already have malware in your environment. Anybody that thinks that they're able to stop malware from getting into their network, they're fooling themselves. The malware is getting in. The threats are real. People are getting into your network. That's the bottom line. They're getting in through the front door. Users are browsing websites. They're clicking on links that they don't know what they are. They're getting emails that they shouldn't be clicking on. They're clicking on the links. The malware is getting in. All the firewalls in the world aren't going to stop that from happening. You may slow it down, but you're not going to stop it. Now, once an attacker gets into your network, now what? Right? The attacker's in your network. Is he going to continue to use malware? Well, probably not. Now he's on your machines. Now he's going to start to impersonate one of your employees. He's going to move laterally through the network using whatever credentials he can find in the environment. He's going to use other tradecraft to try to elevate his permissions. But all these attacks aren't going to rely on malware. This is going to rely on an insider credentials to basically perform actions that would be very unusual for that normal employee. If you don't have the appropriate detection and tools in place, you're not going to be able to detect that. You may have been able to stop the malware some of the time, but once that person gets into your network, and they will, how do you stop them now? How do you detect that they're in your network? How do you stop the data theft? How do you prevent the damage? So this is where our UEBA product comes into play. UEBA stands for User and Entity Behavioral Analytics. And what it is it's a technology that essentially can bring in data from a variety of different sources that allow us to understand who our employees are and what they're doing. And those are the two things that matter when you're trying to stop an insider threat. Because what you really need to understand is you need to understand your users, who they are, what department they're in. Have they been promoted recently? Are they put on a performance plan? Have they received a bad review? Are they showing up to work at weird hours all of a sudden? And what do they do? What do they do? Do they browse the same websites every day? Well, are they browsing the same websites today that they normally do? Are they in a role where they need to encrypt files and put them on USB drives? Or do they need access to webmail? Do they do that as a normal part of their job? You need to understand that if you want to be able to detect if you have an insider in your network that's causing you harm. Now, not all insiders are a threat to your organization. Let's be very clear. But you have to also worry about the insiders who do something negligently, the insider who just hasn't been trained properly not to click that link in the email, who hasn't understood that if they're not careful when they're sending an email, they may send it to the wrong person and expose corporate information, who doesn't know that when you put a file on a USB drive, you've got to be careful because you could lose that USB drive. And your company's information could be compromised if somebody picks up that USB drive if you don't encrypt it. So you do have to worry about those as well. And what this will enable us to do with these technologies is to bring in data from your HR systems, Active Directory. You can bring in data from your door readers. You can bring in data from your SIMs. You can bring in data from your firewalls, your IDSs, your email. And you can bring all this data together. And this will help you with the analytics that we have in our product determine which users are acting the most unusual, that are exhibiting behaviors that would be symbolic of somebody who's trying to cause you harm. So the UABA product provides a lot of deep information. They'll tell you about how your users are feeling, with whom they're talking to. Are they talking to somebody new today? Are they in a bad mood? We talk about this thing called sentiment analysis. It's a great idea, being able to understand, was this person angry when they sent that email? Were they in a good mood? Were they acting unusual?
And how do you determine the author of an email's mood?
So you can do it by looking for keywords. It's not an exact science right now, and we're working on some more advanced technologies, but you can do it by looking for keywords. You can look for words that would represent that the person's angry, that they are trying to take revenge on somebody. Look for the keyword revenge. There's a series of words that you can look for, but typically it's looking at keywords.
Microsoft's doing some really interesting stuff in that space on sentiment analysis. It's really interesting.
This is a new area, but it's an area that once we master it, we'll really be able to improve the efficacy of our risk calculations.
Actually, they've been doing this in schools over the last 5 or 6 years, too. They've been looking for specific keywords around what kids are up to. So they're actually been tracking that in their social media and everywhere else. So this is not a new concept, but it's been around for a while.
Sure.
Schools have been, the ones that are participating have actually cut down on a lot of things. Some of those really nasty ones, too.
Thank you. So we've got HR. We're able to look at performance reviews, determine if they got a good review, a bad review. Any data that you can feed into this, we have a pretty open data model. We're able to build analytics around it. So this is just a deeper dive. I'm not going to go into this in much detail because it's probably hard to see from where you guys are sitting. But essentially, we can bring in our various data sources. We store it all in a data model. We've got algorithms as we essentially apply to the data. What we're trying to do basically is we have different data models that we have built to try to detect very specific behaviors, data theft, for example. And what we try to do is we try to bring in these data sources and compare them to our data model and determine how closely they match our data model. The higher they match, the higher the risk score they get. And essentially what we then do is we surface the users with the highest risk scores. And I'll be doing a demo in a few minutes to show you guys what that looks like. And then once you have all that information, you can use the tool to go in and build a narrative. We can go through and actually see over time exactly what they did. We can look at their emails. We can look at even video of what they did. You can see step by step, every step that they took, the files they downloaded, who they talked to, the communications, et cetera. All this information can come together to help you understand whether the system has correctly identified somebody that is trying to cause your business harm, and you have the data to then go take action on it.
So I have a question about all that.
Yes.
How do you know it's a human? I mean, the biggest problem we have is that It's very, very difficult for us to tell the difference between you as a person and a really good electronic copy of you doing the exact same things, coming in the exact same ways,
Correct.
and faking all of this to fool the systems.
They're not going to do everything that you do. That's the bottom line. They're going to do things that are different than you do because they're out to cause the company harm, and theoretically, you're not. So they're going to take actions, for example, that you wouldn't typically take. Maybe they're going to log into a database, download some files, encrypt those files, and then a minute later upload a really large file to the internet. That's not a typical sequence of steps that you as an employee take. Why? Because you're in HR, and that's not something you would ever need to do. So when we look at how that user is behaving compared to how they normally behave, you'll be able to detect differences in their behavior. And some of those are things that we specifically know to look for. An upload of a large file, for example, accessing the company's website or VPN from different locations at the same time. You're accessing it from Russia and China and the US at the same time. How is that possible, all within 1 hour? You're clearly not in all those different locations. So there's different things that will still be true that we can look for that will enable us to determine that your behavior is different.
See, those are the easy things. I'm talking about the electronic copy that actually knows that you are the right person to go into Salesforce, download a few records every now and then, modify them, and then do something with them, and maybe even upload files to the internet, to another location.
Sure, sure.
You know, a guy that does the exact same thing with the exact same electronic copy of you, and I'm not talking about a person, but a really smart hack, can actually do the exact same thing you do. It just uses different data, and slowly it starts exfiltrating the whole of your Salesforce, using the same thing that you're doing. This is not unheard of.
No, trust me, I get it. And simply, there are always ways to defeat this. This is a tool in the security toolbox. If you walk up to somebody's machine, you break out your cell phone, you take a picture, there's no way we can detect that. We have no tools for that today. So there are always going to be ways to overcome this, but the vast majority of angry employees aren't doing that. The vast majority of people who have access to data they shouldn't have access to are just trying to get an edge because they want to go and help themselves get ahead at their next job by starting off with a good client list. Those types of activities we'll be able to detect. There may be some cases, absolutely, where if you're sophisticated enough and you can really try and pretend to be an actual user and you perform the very same steps that they're doing, that you could probably evade the detection with this technology.
Well, but the other thing is how do you know the user's actually malicious? He could have just been phished.
It doesn't matter to us, right? The goal here is not to cause harm to an employee. So that's the thing. When we talk about insider threats, people are always like, oh my God, you don't trust my employees.
Well, you shouldn't.
No. What we're saying here is that whether it's an actual employee or somebody pretending to be an employee, the bottom line is your data, the thing that you're trying to protect, is at risk of being compromised or has been compromised, and you want to take action on it. Now, how you actually resolve the issue, do you format that machine and reinstall Windows on it, or do you fire an employee? Those are actions that you have to decide after you've protected your data. And you can do that using some of the tools that we give you so you can actually follow the trail back. And I'll actually show you a compromised user case in a minute where you can see a person who was phished and did actually click on an email and how we're able to trace that back.
Okay.
This is my last slide, and I'll jump into the demo. This is just really kind of showing how all the different pieces come together. The key part of this slide here is that UABA is really the brains. Right? We have all these other technologies that we talked about, Richard talked about. We have technologies on the edge for collecting data from your outbound web traffic, your email. We have data like our Insider Threat product, which will actually do really deep data collection on your machine. So we can pull video, we can pull registry changes, clipboard, any file written to a drive of any kind, data being uploaded, et cetera. We have a whole host of different technologies. Our CASB product, which protects any data going to a SaaS service, which is really an interesting technology. All of those are collecting data and making decisions about whether to allow or not allow a particular action to occur. Well, that decision-making process is fed by the brains, which is our UABA. Our UABA is essentially informing those technologies, how risky is this person? Is this an action that I want to allow? Is this a risky action that they're trying to take? Oh, they're trying to upload a picture of a cat to their friend, at their work. Well, that's fine. What do we care? It's just a picture of a cat. Oh, now they're trying to send a formula over to a competitor. Well, that might be okay if the person's in the right role and they haven't exhibited any strange behavior. But if they're in a role that shouldn't be doing that, or they're acting really strange all of a sudden, perhaps we want to block that. That's where the UABA comes in. It acts as the brains of our technology stack and really helps these systems become a lot smarter.
But if I'm really clever and I embed the formula via stenography into the cat photo.
Yeah, we can detect that as well. There's a lot of different things that we can detect. We have the ability to even detect if you take a picture of a whiteboard that somebody's written on. We can do OCR on what was written on the whiteboard and detect whether there's sensitive information on it as well. So it's an area that's evolving, but there are many ways that people would try and evade this. And of course, we're not going to catch them all. But if you tried to embed data into an image and it was possible for us to detect that with the technology we have, then we certainly would. And we have a lot of cool technologies around that.
So this comes at a cost of processing. Where are the points for when the machine learning, where's the control plane for this? Where does that exist? Where do you guys fit into? I see network DLP, cloud, endpoint DLP, very distributed system. The data is distributed, the access points are distributed. Mm-hmm. How does that data feed back to a centralized system that trains the algorithm, and then where is that processing done, and what's the impact on end user experience?
Right. So we do different levels of enforcement on each of those different technologies that you just mentioned. Some of it will happen without the UABA at all. So if all you bought was DLP, for example, you don't get UABA. And the technology that you have available to you is essentially whatever policies you've written, that's the actions we will take. It won't be based on the way that you're behaving. It'll be based on more or less static policies that you define that say if the person's uploading a file that's watermarked with confidential and they're uploading it to one of these 3 websites, block it, for example.
So does the UEBA formulate, is the UEBA algorithm trained on data that I'm getting from that's already reported to my DLP central controller?
Yes.
So I'm not creating new traffic.
That's right.
I'm just updating DLP rules based off of learnings from UEBA.
The DLP system will have the ability to do that without manual intervention, but everything else you said is absolutely correct. The data that UEBA receives comes from all the different products that we have, so they're already fed into those products and then back-channeled back to UEBA. And the UEBA can ingest data from tools that aren't even ours. You can ingest data from Active Directory or your badge reader or...
So I guess the question is, and I don't know where you are in the maturity of UEBA, is saying, so I have a DLP controller, and the DLP controller says PII should not leave the system generically.
Correct.
Then there's some special use case, and I don't want an analyst to go through and look at that use case. I want UEBA to make that determination. UEBA should then be able to tell DLP, the controller, that that activity is either good, bad, or should be flagged.
Yes.
Do we have that capability today? That's the question.
We do. And the way it works is not really black and white. And Richard was trying to explain that a little bit earlier. What we do is we use UEBA to help identify the level of risk associated with a particular user. We give them a risk score, okay? That risk score, you can then write policies on, right? So you can write a policy that says, allow this PII out as long as the person's risk score is below X. If this person's risk score is above X, encrypt it, but still allow it out because it's okay. If their risk score is above this, don't allow it out at all, generate an alert, and have some analyst go and investigate why is this user doing that. Maybe this user, is acting very suspicious and, is warranting a further investigation.
And the assumption is the risk score is dynamic.
Correct. Yes.
But that also depends on DLP being properly configured and data properly classified.
That's correct.
Because most data that I see in most places are just improperly classified.
Well, you can classify your data in a variety of ways. It doesn't require you to actually have a watermark on the data. right? So what we can do with DLP, and with any DLP, is you can look for certain keywords that represent keywords that are sensitive to your organization, and we can look for it again in images, we can look for it in text, we can watermark documents that we know to be sensitive, we can do the whole document, we can do chunks of the document. So if somebody tried to pull out a paragraph from the document and email that out, we could still see that. So there's different ways of us being able to tell the system what's sensitive and what's not sensitive. It definitely doesn't require you to watermark everything.
So I see O365 up there, and do you guys take the tags that Microsoft is using with their DLP product? Can you apply those tags to, and take those tags, interpret those tags in UEBA and make decisions based on those tags?
That's correct.
Okay.
Yeah, and we just demoed something at Insight where our CASB product could work off of those tags as well.
Do you allow that risk score to be consumable by just your products or other products as well? Can it?
We do have APIs, so you can integrate into the APIs. We have a user interface, so you can certainly do what you want from the user interface as well. In fact, that's what I'm going to show you guys next.
How long are you keeping the behavior information to build that behavior profile? And we're talking about a lot of information gathering. And Richard mentioned privacy when he talked, but I haven't seen anything about privacy yet. Are we doing that later?
I don't know if either of you guys covering privacy?
No, but we can probably address those conversations as you see fit.
Well, really, the first question is, how long are we keeping that behavior data to build the profile for the users?
It's up to you.
Okay.
Because you can go back and look at that data historically if you wanted to go back 6 months and do an investigation on an employee based on activity. So it's entirely up to the company to decide.
Is there a recommendation by Forcepoint that says this is really the minimum we need to build that profile and understand what a user's normal behavior is?
I don't know if we have a recommendation on that. I mean, I would imagine that you would need at least a day's worth of data and nothing less than that. But I don't know if we have a recommendation on that. All right, well, let me jump into the demonstration. I'm going to try to do a live demo, so it's probably not going to work, but we'll try.
I have another question, sorry.
Okay.
Could any behavior that is used to build that models be reconductible to the person? This is some question that John asked it before. And asking this because of GDPR and privacy and so on. So if the person that behave in that way is not reconductible to that data, the company can store more or less securely. But if the person is identified in a correct way, it's a pain for the company. So
Yeah.
is it possible to disjoin behavior to person?
Yeah, we have another product called our Insider Threat product, which we're not going to talk about today. But our Insider Threat product actually provides a lot of the capabilities that you guys are talking about. I wasn't planning to get into that into too much detail, but essentially we have some things that allow us to essentially decide what data we're going to gather, when we're going to gather it. You can use it based on essentially this user is acting really, really bad. I'm going to gather as much data as I can about the user because I have reason to. This user is acting normal. I don't need to gather much data because it's just a risk of privacy. It's a risk for me as an organization. It's unnecessary for me to collect that data. And then we can put in different policies as well around, well, okay, this person's in a country where this type of data collection is not allowed, so we don't want to bring in that type of data, or we don't want to store it in this way, or we want to store it in this other way. So we do have a lot of those capabilities. The UABA product isn't really, isn't the place where you would do that. So the use case I want to just go over is...
So one more question
Sure.
before you get to this. If I was to install this in my network, how easy is it just start working immediately, or how much is there to set up? Is it like a heavy lift, or?
We would come in and have to work with you, so we have to identify what data sources are important to you. We have to understand your data, so we'll work with you to do that, and then we'll build the appropriate data models. So it is, to answer your question, there is a lift involved. It's not a just install this product, start pumping data into it. As time goes on, what we'd like to be able to do is start to understand what are the more common data sources, what are the more common data models, and be able to provide some out-of-the-box configurations. But now it's largely, we have to come in and work with you to set it up. All right, so for this example, we have this user. His name is Chad Pursley. And he is a user who was visiting a website in the middle of the night and clicked on a link he probably shouldn't have clicked on. And unfortunately, he started acting really weird after that, which leads us to believe that his machine was compromised. So how did we figure this out? Well, what we can see from our dashboard here is our users, and they're all ranked by their score, by their risk score, from 0 to 100. Chad is ranked at the top at 66. That means that he's showing us the highest risk score of any user that we have in our organization. So me, as an analyst, I'm going to look at Chad first to try to understand, well, why is his risk score so high? What is going on with him that makes him unusual to us? If we take a look at this chart, what we can see is that sometime around midnight, his data exfiltration score went way, way, way high, which means that we believe there's a really good chance that there was data exfiltration activity happening in the middle of the night. So now we want to go and investigate, well, okay, the system thinks that he was doing some data exfiltration. You know, why did it come to that conclusion? What actually took place? So we can drill into this in a little more detail and see exactly what took place. So what we're going to see next is we're going to see a timeline view. So what we have is the data exfiltration scenario, and we have various data models that we compared his activities to. So we have internal data movement, data loss, external data movement, data reconnaissance, et cetera. And what we're doing is we're taking his activity and we're comparing it to these different data models that we have so we can determine whether or not he's exhibiting any of the behaviors described here. And as we can see, around 9 a.m., we started seeing some internal data movement. Then we saw what looks like some data loss, et cetera. So we'll drill into this in a timeline perspective. The bottom of this UI, we have it broken down by a timeline.
What do you mean by data loss there?
Means
The storage guy, so data loss means something very specific.
it means something entirely different than what you were thinking. Data loss for us means that somebody took some data out of the company.
And how's that different
Oh,
from?
I'm sorry, that's data exfiltration. Data loss is when it's destroyed. They went in and started deleting files or deleting data in the database.
Okay.
My apologies.
Are your models specific to each customer, or are they across your entire customer base?
The models themselves are generic, but what you have to do is you have to go in and configure the model. So you have to give it some information that's specific to your organization to help the models work properly. And that will be specific, because the things that would represent data loss in your organization might be different than somebody else's, or same thing with data exfiltration. And if we didn't have that customized, then you might end up with a lot of false positives.
Do you tune the models?
We do, working with the
Yeah,
customer.
and keywords that mean you're angry in Brooklyn are different from keywords that mean you're angry in Minneapolis.
That's a true statement. At least I'm told it's a true statement.
It's a family broadcast. I can't use the Brooklyn word.
So how much data do you need to do all this? I'm assuming you can't do it off of just one click.
Oh, of course not, no. But a single operation is something that we can look at, and depending on our models, in some cases we can detect that it is malicious activity. For example, well, that's not really a good example, but we have an example in here where we monitor all the processes that are normally running on your machine. If we see a new process launched that hasn't normally been executing on your machine, we can detect that and we can alert you to it. Is that by itself a problem? Not necessarily. Usually you need other factors, other behaviors to raise your risk score, but that will help us to raise the risk score. And you get enough of those things happening together and you end up with an elevated risk score. And you'll probably actually be able to see that as we go through this example. So at 11, I'm sorry, no, that...
So when you start training your data models with my data, how long does it have to run before it's ready to just go? You talking months? You talking days?
No, it's days. It's days. Yeah, I don't know specifically how many days, but I know it's days.
And if that assumes the users are constantly running through your system, if you have a person that comes in once every 30 days, then they...
It takes some time for you to detect that their behavior is different.
Okay.
Yes. That's right. All right, so what we see with this
Okay.
particular...
Getting back to data loss for a second, where are you collecting that?
we probably have
You're saying I
examples in here.
deleted a file. Do you have an agent on my NetApp filer? Do you have an agent on my desktop?
Desktop.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, we install, well, in this particular case, you could collect data from anywhere, right? So if you actually want to send syslog from your storage array, you could, and we can detect that.
Yeah, but I'm not going to log every file delete
You are
in my
not.
NetApp because it'll fall over on logging.
You are not. But what you might be able to see is that a user logged into that device that doesn't normally log into that device. Is that data loss? No. But does it contribute to the overall behavior and scenario? Absolutely.
Maybe, maybe not. I mean, if you log in to do administration, you log in to do administration. If that contributes to raising the risk score, well, that's a problem.
If you've never logged in before and you are not in a role that you should be logging into that machine, that could raise your risk score.
Well, here's the other thing is most people
If
that
he's
I-
not in a role where he should be logging into that machine, he shouldn't be able to log into that machine.
Exactly.
People misconfigure things
Yeah,
all the time.
exactly. Let's say you can, though.
Yeah, your S3 buckets shouldn't be wide open either. But there you go.
And mine aren't.
Hence
There are a lot
the
of
data
should have bees.
So assuming I have a zero trust model inside my network where I have to get authentication to do anything, this would be really good. But if I don't have a zero trust infrastructure where I basically have it wide open, I mean, I have more problems than this is going to find.
Yes, and you probably should start with a different technology.
Well, but I mean, a lot of companies out there are in that M&M model where once you're in, we don't care. So how does this help me get to that zero trust boundary?
I think if your company is a company that doesn't care, they're probably not a Forcepoint customer.
That's right.
I think this is kind of a self-qualifying product. You've already done that, and now you're going one step above. You don't implement DLP and you haven't locked down your network shares.
Right. This requires people to actually run the tool on a daily basis. You're not hiring analysts to go and do this work if you're
No,
doing
I
it
mean, I know a lot of companies that have a M&M model still, and once you're in, you're in.
Yeah,
And
so
these
they
are-
wouldn't be
these-
looking at this. I mean.
No, actually, they would be.
I avoided questions about, I'm not a huge fan of DLP from an end user experience. But if you've made that decision, and this is a product on top of that. So we're not going to argue whether or not you should do DLP or not. The decision is made. Now, how do I make it a better experience? And this is potentially a better experience.
That's right.
Well, no, I was just saying is that assuming that there's zero trust is a big assumption
Okay.
in a lot of
that.
businesses. In a lot of big businesses. They may lock down one small area of their
Well,
environment.
this doesn't require that, but if your entire network is wide open, you can upload files anywhere you want. You're allowed to use any website that you want. There's zero protections placed on your network other than perhaps allowing outsiders in. This will still be able to detect activity that's unusual, but you're probably going to have a bigger problem on your hands than that, because I suspect that with that level of trust, you're going to have a lot of insiders doing things that you don't want them to do, and it's going to be really hard to sift through all that data and figure
Well,
out
could you
which
use
ones
this-
are malicious and which ones are just people who aren't doing what you want them to do as a corporation.
So you could use this as a visibility tool as well for those cases so that they could say, okay, here's the value of locking us down.
That's right.
Okay.
That's right. All right, I'm just going to run through this really quick. So what we can see is at 9 a.m., this particular user was copying a file. Actually, I don't remember if this is the user I wanted to use. No, this is the wrong use case. I'm sorry. This is Chad Pursley. No, I wanted Philip Zamudo. My apologies. All right, where's Philip? Here we go. All right, so in Philip's case, again, we got a data exfiltration. All right. Yeah, this is the right one. Okay. All right, so we're going to scroll down, look at the timeline. Okay, so the first thing that we see him doing is he's connecting to, let's see, he's doing some reconnaissance, if I recall correctly. Yes, he's doing some reconnaissance. He's trying to find some sensitive data within our environment, we think. If all we had was this, we probably wouldn't do anything with this piece of information. So what? He executes some commands. They look a little bit suspicious. But it looks like he's looking for source code. We see then a little bit later on, about a half hour later, suddenly he's starting to execute some commands to copy source code out of the Git repository. Again, depending on this person's role, maybe it's not that unusual. So we're going to look a little bit further down to try to figure out, is this guy trying to cause us any harm as a business? Okay, around 1 o'clock, we see him cloning even more data buckets. So again, we're starting to see data getting moved, which is concerning. But again, this user, it's maybe not that unusual, though for him, maybe this time frame is unusual, who's doing this at 1 o'clock in the morning. Okay, it's just more of the same. Okay, after downloading this data, we see that he's going to run some web searches. Where are those? Yeah, my scenario doesn't match up correctly. Okay, well, what we can see he's doing here is we can see him doing some more reconnaissance. Then we see him starting to move this data over to a server in our network. We don't know why he's doing that, but he is. That's very suspicious. We continue to follow down what he's doing. We can see that he's uploading a file to his Google Drive account. This appears to be some sort of test to see if he can do it. And you can tell, if we look at the details. Oops. Well, we can see where he uploaded it to. We can see where the file came from. I don't think we have the contents of the file here, but there's another way to look at that. Then we start to see him copying even more files. We can see that the DLP system tried to block his upload to the Google Drive. That's because there's a policy in place that tells him that he can't upload files to, certainly Java files, to our Google Drive server. We then can see that this person is trying to rename the file to, or upload a PDF file rather to box.com. So now he's trying a different website to see if he can get away with it because he wasn't able to do it with Google Drive. Theoretically, our DLP would have blocked that as well. We can see that DLP actually permitted this particular operation to occur. Why we would allow it to go to Box and not to Google Drive is beyond me, but that's how they're configured. Basically, you could just see that he's doing a lot more data movement.
So this is pretty interesting from a user perspective. So if I've deployed DLP, this helps make DLP smarter. One of the gaps in the entire industry itself is cloud native services like Lambda or Google App Engine, in which these systems that don't have a whole lot of control over them start to interact with whether it's my cloud-based infrastructure or my internal infrastructure. There's not a lot of controls around that. Do you guys either today or on the roadmap have the plans of integrating it with something like Lambda so that if a Lambda call comes from AWS to an Oracle system, you automatically flag it, say, hey, that's unusual, and then build intelligence around that or machine learning around those type of actions?
There's nothing preventing you today from ingesting that data into the system. We've never actually tried to do that. It's not a use case that we have focused on today, but I'm sure that if we actually tried to set that up, I suspect it would actually work. The CASB product, are you guys familiar with CASB? Mm-hmm. Okay, so the CASB product will allow us to be able to detect things like access to AWS, access to Google, access to Azure. So we do have the ability to collect that data, and then we can send that data back from our CASB into the UABA. So we do have the visibility to do that. I'm just not sure that we're actually doing that today. I don't know
it's a problem I don't think many people are thinking about today, but it's one of my concerns, is what happens when systems that have roles that you give too much power to, you just can't, the infrastructure isn't there to control it at the platform, but you still need controls to either audit access or restrict access when either internal threats or systems go rogue and access data they shouldn't access. Okay.
Yeah, those are cloud guys.
Well, but this is also a question, you're assuming human users here in this model. Let's assume that's a system.
Yes, I see your point. Go ahead.
Okay, I got an application. It talks over an API to another application on site, which talks to yet another application that moves data around. Now, a good hacker, which could be just something could have been sitting there and it could have just flipped a bit somewhere that started moving data to the wrong place. Maybe the array was down and it went somewhere else because that was all it could find. It was an intelligent piece of software.
Understood.
I'm assuming that this thing could track that type of behavior as well.
It can. What we consider to be, so we talk about users and entities. An entity can be any object in the system. So we absolutely do have the ability to do that. A user doesn't actually have to be a real user in order for this product to work. I don't know, again, that we're doing a lot in that particular domain at this point in time. But I
That's not
don't
even
see why we
touching the
couldn't do
cloud.
it. Yeah, I mean, it's absolutely a great point. You know, a piece of software in your system that's normally communicating out to a particular other machine in your system suddenly starts communicating to a different machine because it's been compromised. You want to know that particular piece of software is now acting differently and that it's potentially going out to a malicious site. You know, there's a variety of tools in your toolbox. UEBA by itself isn't going to be the only tool. I would imagine an IDS would be able to help you with that potentially. Well,
They're not behavior-based, they're
if you had it set up to look for specific hosts that were command and control hosts, you could block the activity that way.
I'm just talking about nothing left in my network.
Oh, everything within your network.
Everything's within my network and just moving things around to places that I don't know exist. Or I have an unknown service out there that's been out there for 20 years. I bring this in because no one's known it's been sitting there. It's been sitting in the closet or behind the mainframe.
Sure,
You know,
sure.
no one knows it's there.
Absolutely.
And suddenly you see a lot of traffic where it's actually doing things, moving to where you're tracking.
Sure.
You should be able to track all that behavior.
Yeah, as long
too.
as we can get the data into it, absolutely.
Okay.
I'm not sure that we have really good data models for that, but that would be pretty straightforward to add.
The other one is automation. I have automation orchestration tools, and there's a lot of people that are afraid that they just will go wild because the people made they did an exponential problem,
Right.
or whatever it is. The programmers made a mistake. How would this help me to make sure that that doesn't happen? Because that will never leave my data center.
Yeah, well, I mean, this doesn't require you to leave your data center. You can absolutely do this entirely all within.
But I'm using the standard APIs provided by either using something like S3, which is local, using a Skelly or some other type of storage device. I'm using deployment through one of the hypervisors or not. Any number of things that I'm doing, they're all API-based. So I have this thing throwing off a bunch of API calls that start moving data around, creating things on my network, even creating networks. Could this track that type of behavior?
As long as they generate a log that could be ingested
Okay,
of some sort.
cool. Because that would be very good to detect things have gone wild.
Yeah, we use a pretty cool NiFi connector system that essentially you can write a parser on the endpoint where the data lives, whatever that endpoint happens to be, and ingest it right back into our generic data model, and then we can adjust the data models based on the data that we're ingesting. So it's all very configurable. All right, Ante, you want to go next? I'll try to get you hooked back up
I
to
have a
the other.
philosophical question while you're doing the switch. So when I have managed environments, curiously, my file share doesn't have a quota, and my mailbox doesn't have a quota, and I don't have to use the web proxy for content filtering because I don't want to.
Because you're special?
Yeah. How do we protect an organization from the people who are running this system? Because you're looking at people behaving funny. How do we protect Edward from opting out of being monitored by this thing so he can do whatever he wants?
Well, there's no way to fully.
Yeah, who will guard the guards?
Yeah, there's no way to fully opt out. Well, I take that back. Of course there is, but you'd have to go to a lot of different products and configure them to ignore you. For example, your firewall, right? Your firewall, all your traffic is going to go through the firewall. there's really no way to stop that unless you happen to be off the network. If you're off the network, then obviously you have an endpoint on your machine. If your endpoint is not installed because you're a special privileged user, then it's up to the company to decide, are we going to let a person who has a laptop that's totally out of our control have our private data on that laptop? Do we trust them enough? And the answer is yes. I mean, there's only so much you can do. But we do have the ability with our CASB products, we're going to talk about that, to still monitor what you're doing, at least with SaaS services, even if you don't have an endpoint installed on your machine. So you just happen to walk up to a computer at the mall, you start logging on to Office 365, and you're deleting emails or copying stuff from your mailbox to the local USB on that machine, we can still detect that. So there's some things that we can do. We still have some
Hopefully,
visibility, but
between all the different places that you're ingesting data from, even if I know how it works and I have the authority to remove myself from different policies,
you'd have to have a lot of power.
you can still follow me around pretty well.
If you were God and you really could do anything, then there's
organizations
probably a
where-
limitation.
There's orgs that people have that power.
Yeah,
I
there's
have
a
no
more-
doubt. I have no doubt.
I'll push back on that. If you're Forcepoint, then you're probably on the SOX. You're going to fail some audits.
Yeah, you will.
You're going to, if you're in this category of products, you're going to have to go through some point of audit, and you're going to fail. If you have that much power, that something's wrong.
Yeah, I think that's a fair statement.
Good point.